Chapter 1. The Author and the Actress. Paris, 1866. Mon Dieu! That actress really just bared herself on one of the grandest stages in Paris. Alexandre Dumas had always loved the theater. He had witnessed countless performances, some dazzling, others dreary, so it was rare for anything to truly astonish him. But tonight was different. Tonight, the play was Mazeppa, a daring adaptation of a poem by Alexandre's literary idol, Lord Byron. Yet he was not in attendance for the sake of art. Tonight he was there for something far more lascivious. The intoxicating and infamous Ada Isaacs Menken. She was, at best, a capable actress. Spirited, but under normal circumstances would never have been allowed to grace the stage at the Théâtre du Châtelet. Still, she possessed what most actresses lacked: a fearless inclination to disrupt convention. Despite her considerable beauty, Ada was not playing the lead female role of the adoring Polish countess. Instead, she was cast as her male lover, even wearing trousers almost the entire production. Until she didn't. As the play reached its end, the scorned count stripped Ada's character of her costume and bound her, entirely naked, to a dappled horse before sending Ada galloping to her fiery theatrical demise. The sold-out audience was spellbound. The theater, though usually a favorite of Paris's elite ladies, was tonight far more heavily attended by their husbands and fathers. While their wives gasped at Ada's audacity and indecency, the men tightly clutched their opera glasses, hoping for a better view. As the final curtain fell, only one thought pulsed through Alexandre's mind. He had to buy that horse. Thankfully, Alexandre had a standing invitation to all the best soirées in Paris. That was the benefit of being one of the most renowned authors in France. He rose swiftly from his seat, though his large frame no longer moved with the grace it once had. Several women tried to intercept him to converse, but he was not interested. He had no time for hollow flattery tonight. He pushed his way down the sweeping marble staircase toward the grand salon where he knew his friends would gather. While he waited, he saw no reason not to indulge. A flute of champagne found its way into his hand, followed closely by a butler bearing a tray of coquilles Saint-Jacques. He bit into one with anticipation, then nearly choked. With a grimace, he seized the arm of the nearest waiter. "Take me to the chef," he barked. "I'm afraid guests aren't permitted in the kitchens, monsieur," the man replied cautiously. "Do you know who I am?" Alexandre asked, already striding forward. The servant gave a wary nod. "Excellent. Then you know that when I say I need to speak to the chef, you take me to speak with the chef." His quest for the actress would have to wait. If there was one thing that Alexandre could not abide by, it was an unseasoned scallop. Moments later, he stood in the bustling kitchen, resplendent in his finest frock coat, delivering an impromptu lecture to a very harried-looking kitchen staff. He waved his hand at the offending tray and settled himself behind the stove. "You do not drown seafood in Gruyere. The scallop is a treasure of the sea. Treat it with respect," he snarled as he snatched a wooden spoon from the sous chef to stir the sauce. He grabbed a bottle of white wine and took a quick swig before gently pouring some into the skillet. "Get me some butter." A low, amused voice interrupted him from across the counter. "I didn't realize tonight's hors d'oeuvres would be prepared by the great Alexandre Dumas. Who knew your talents extended so far beyond the pen?" He turned to find Ada Isaacs Menken herself, leaning alluringly across the counter, a crooked smile playing on her lips. "This kitchen is turning into a bloody circus," the chef muttered, throwing up his hands. Dumas straightened, eyes twinkling. "And what, may I ask, brings you to the culinary underworld, mademoiselle?" "Hunger," she replied simply. But there was a glint in her eye that intrigued Alexandre. He laughed. Well, if you are hungry, don't grab anything off that tray. There is too much Dijon on the salad terrine, and these scallops have so much cheese they are practically still swimming. Give me a moment, and I'll make you something more palatable." Her brow lifted with amusement. He turned back to the sauce simmering before him, stirring with surprising finesse. He dipped a spoon in, tasted, then nodded with satisfaction. "Perfection," he declared. He lifted the same spoon toward her lips. "Here, tell me what you think." She met his eyes as she leaned in. "My goodness, monsieur, that is so delicious it is nearly sinful," she said, smiling slyly. A drop of sauce slipped from the spoon and landed on his coat, but Alexandre paid it no mind. "Take note, monsieur le chef," he quipped, before grabbing a plate of freshly cooked food and a glass of champagne. "Shall we find you a drink, mademoiselle? You must be parched after such a performance. You were exquisite." "Thank you, Monsieur Dumas. I'd love one." She was visibly less than half his age, but that never stopped Alexandre before. He returned her smile with effortless charm, despite his less than elegant appearance. He may not be young anymore, but he refused to allow his achy bones or stained frock to dictate his demeanor. There was something about her that captivated him. It wasn't just about the horse anymore, though he would get to that later. Perhaps it was her accent? Her French carried a peculiar cadence that vexed him. It wasn't a vernacular issue, but the literal timbre of her voice. Like there was something tragically wrong with it. It was probably because she was American, but he already knew that. She seemed to have another, more interesting secret that he yearned to uncover. Then it struck him. Her hair. Her curls looked natural. They were tightly wound all by themselves, and not because she had spent hours trying to make them like that. That could only mean one thing. Alexandre also lived in the world of white men, walked among them, laughed, drank. But like this actress, he was an outsider. African blood still coursed through him, though it was ever so slightly masked by a couple generations of Frenchmen. A draught slipped in through the double doors to the kitchen, rustling her silk dress that, very strategically, hung mostly off her shoulder. She was truly ravishing. "Do you always steal away to the kitchens after curtain call?" Alexandre asked. "There are dozens of people outside hoping for your company." "I don't like to eat before performances, but, if I'm being honest, a bit of chance and perhaps a touch of rogue devilry may better describe what led me here to you this evening," she replied mischievously. "Rogue devilry?" he grinned. "Intriguing." Her eyes sparkled. Despite her peculiar accent, she wielded words like a seasoned seductress. "I had hoped to find you in the ballroom," Alexandre said, a roguish flicker in his eyes. "I wanted to inquire about purchasing your Arabian. I've never encountered a horse with such remarkable fortune." "I regret to inform you she is not for sale," Ada replied smoothly. "The horse is female?" he exclaimed. "Oh, now I must have her." She smiled, then spoke more seriously. "I must confess, Monsieur Dumas, I had ulterior motives in seeking your company tonight." She coughed gently into her hand, then composed herself, her expression shifting to something nearer to sincerity. Interesting. He hadn't expected their encounter to be mutually sought. Such a combination was rare, practically Parnassian in its poetry. "And what might those motives be, mademoiselle?" Alexandre asked, his curiosity piqued. Leaning against the countertop, the actress regarded him thoughtfully, while the kitchen staff moved about stiffly, pretending not to eavesdrop. "I wish to draw upon your illustrious prestige, Monsieur Dumas," she said at last. "I desire very deeply to be recognized for my talent as an actress. I want to play the great theaters, performing Shakespeare and the works of yourself and your friend, Monsieur Hugo. I don't want my fame tied solely to my nakedness." "Ah, but your nakedness is something to behold," Alexandre smiled. "I am well aware," she replied, batting her eyelashes with trained perfection that could melt the most celibate man in Paris to her will. "How do you think I have made it this far?" She paused, staring longingly at something lost in the corners of her mind. "And yet, I believe, no, I am certain that I am meant for more." "Would you care for a walk?" he offered. "I think we may have reached the limits of this kitchen's patience." "It would be my pleasure, sir," she said. "Do you mind taking the back door? I have little interest in entertaining anyone other than you tonight." "That sounds like a proposition I'd be a fool to refuse," he replied. Perhaps he was about to be as lucky as that horse. He grabbed a couple bottles of champagne from the counter and a pair of cups. "For our walk," he said with a smirk. "The man's a genius," she replied flirtatiously. "Though I suppose we already knew that. Your reputation precedes you." Alexandre tipped his hat with a wink. They slipped out the back door of the Théâtre du Châtelet and strolled until they found a bench overlooking the river. Alexandre sat down gratefully. His feet ached, but Ada circled behind and leaned over the backrest of the bench, adjusting her head gracefully on her hands and ensuring her chest was right at Alexandre's eye level. She gazed at the water contemplatively. "Is that Notre Dame?" she asked. She was almost beckoning him to get back up and stand behind her. It would have been quite the romantic tableau, like something he would write about in one of his novels. A beautiful woman on the banks of the Seine at nightfall with her lover behind her. He would hold her gently as they talk about Parisian architecture while he runs his hand over her perfect figure. It would be like living art. And the prospect was extremely tempting. But his body was disagreeing with him at the moment, so instead he stayed seated. "It is," he said simply. "I thought so," she replied wistfully. "It seems like the sort of church where love stories happen." Alexandre liked where this was going. A pas de deux of their own seemed increasingly likely. He adjusted his weight, trying to sit with a bit more presence. His body groaned in protest. Fame, thankfully, often helped his paramours overlook his more unsightly qualities, which seemed to become more prominent each passing year. Nonetheless, he always figured it was best to address his shortcomings when they appeared rather than pretending they weren't there. He had noticed that if he didn't, the women usually started overacting and pretending they didn't see them. However, most of his lovers were not particularly talented actresses. Perhaps this one would be different, as acting was her craft. Unlike the seamstress from last weekend, but best not to push his luck. "I must apologize, mon amour," he said with a chuckle. "Age has a way of making my body speak louder than my voice at times." The actress laughed lightly, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "No need for apologies, Monsieur Dumas. It is not every night I find myself in the company of such a distinguished author. It is a wonder to me, a man such as yourself. Why have you never married?" Alexandre chuckled, running a hand through his tousled hair. His curls were no longer as apparent as they were in his youth, and the cover was now a dark gray, only peppered with the black from his younger years. He never really cared to tame his mane much. The slightly crazed look just added to his social intrigue, particularly among the more artistically inclined members of the Parisian elite. It had a rugged mystique that never seemed to hinder his book sales. "Marriage," Alexandre muttered. "I have learned many things in life, foremost being that women inspire us to great things and prevent us from achieving them." Ada smirked. "Perhaps you've only met women with limited ambition." Alexandre hummed thoughtfully. She cleared her throat, then continued, her voice lowering. "I recognize this is forward, but I believe that associating myself with a man of your reputation could open theatrical roles for me in Europe. Perhaps we could help each other. You let me into your circles, and I let you into, well, me." Alexandre chuckled at her candor. He was accustomed to people seeking his favor, but few were so forthright. He knew perhaps he should be offended, but he wasn't. Her tenacity was refreshing. She was correct about his influence. Beyond his own celebrity, Alexandre was deeply connected with many influential Parisians. Once, he had even been intimately acquainted with the king himself, though Louis-Philippe had passed away over a decade ago. The old king had known his father from the days of the Revolution. But today, France was a land of lovers rather than soldiers. He studied her quietly. "You wouldn't be the first to seek my bed for personal gain, mademoiselle. But I must warn you, I am not a man who opens doors frivolously. I only patronize those I believe in, and I am not a theater producer. When you seek Alexandre Dumas, you must be prepared to listen. I am a man of many stories." "I have heard as much. There is nothing I appreciate more than a compelling narrative," she replied. "Proceed with caution, mademoiselle," he said with a smile. "You'll need to endure my company first. I feel compelled to advise you. I have been told that I could talk a man to death if given the opportunity. Then I shall consider myself fortunate to be in the presence of such a master orator. Tell me, Monsieur Dumas, of your books and your extraordinary Parisian life." It never took much probing to coax a story from Alexandre. With a happy grin, he began to regale Ada with tales of swashbuckling adventures and romantic intrigues. His words painted her a vivid picture of a bygone era. Some of it was history, and some of it came straight out of his novels and the depths of his imagination. There were musketeers, men in iron masks, and imprisoned counts seeking revenge. The stories were fantastical, and yet, with each passing word, he could see that Ada was realizing the intricate and subtle truth. His most famous characters were hardly the fiction they masqueraded as. He squinted slightly as he studied her expressions. Her gaze was deep, her smile warm, but tempered with thought. She was more than a frisky coquette. She may just understand the truth hidden beyond the words. There was something remarkable in this woman, Miss Ada Isaacs-Mencken. He could tell from their first conversation that she was different from most women who were fated to wake up beside him. She was brimming with a sort of reckless energy. It was a rare and very attractive trait in a woman. "Where's home for you?" Alexandre asked. "That is a surprisingly hard question to answer," Ada responded. "I was born here, actually, in Paris, but I spent my life abroad. We lived in Cuba, then Louisiana, Texas, New York. We moved frequently because my family is—" She paused, almost uncertain if she wanted to continue. "Your family is what?" he pressed. "Jewish." "Were you afraid I wouldn't approve? This is Paris. The Jewish people were emancipated here during the Revolution." "Emancipation hardly means that we live without judgment. But no, fear doesn't suit me. I lived through a civil war. I've had rotten fruit thrown at me on stage and in the street. I've had vile verses written about my body, circulated like carnival posters from New York to Texas. However, I did wonder if telling you the truth would be disadvantageous to my aspirations this evening." "I am not a zealot," Alexandre said offhandedly. "You've been through quite the journey. It is no wonder you have no place to call home." "I prefer a more bohemian existence," she said, smiling faintly. "And where's home for you, monsieur? I should like to see it later." Alexandre's expression softened. "The Chateau Monte Cristo." "Like in your book?" He nodded. "That story is particularly sacred to me." Ada nestled closer, her head brushing his shoulder. "Then tell me, not the version the public knows, the real story, the one behind the novel." Alexandre leaned back against the bench as memories of another time flooded his mind. A gentle breeze carried the scent of the water, and in that stillness his voice reverberated against the cobblestones that bore the feet of his forebearers. the story of the Chateau Monte Cristo. It is history itself, and it begins long before my time, in a land far from here, back when the land of my ancestors was known as La Patrie and Africa. It was before Napoleon, even before the revolution itself. Though my chateau sits just outside of Paris, its story actually hails from Saint-Domingue. We call it Haiti today, and it begins with my grandmother, Marie Cessette. What a unique and beautiful name, Ada murmured. She was beautiful, Alexandre replied softly. I regret that I never knew her. She was the great matriarch in a saga of distinguished men. Distinguished men, sir. Your humility has no bounds. One of my many gifts, he smiled. Her wit tantalized him. Few women could match his rhythm, much less hold his attention through both conversation and silence. Yet she managed both effortlessly. She made him feel comfortable and familiar while still being exotic and exciting. French women had become so bland since the Revolution. She reminded him a bit of his Aunt Rose, God rest her soul, bright, tenacious, and fearless. And so he began. In the quiet of the night, Alexandre Dumas spun a tale for Ada Isaacs Mencken that stretched across continents and centuries, weaving together the threads of history and legend. The shadows deepened as the moon sank behind Notre Dame, causing the river Seine to reflect God's radiance, as the story of the illustrious Dumas family unfolded, rising like a phoenix from the ashes of Saint-Domingue.